Hello and welcome. I'm Hullhound, and in this video we'll be finalising our Frogger clone using Godot. That means that we'll be adding in the final sort of win screen, as well as a live counter and the ability to permanently lose. We'll also add some polish just to get the game looking that bit better. Let's start by adding in our win screen. In order to do that, we need a set of assets that we can use in order to actually build and construct that win screen. Kenny has a pack that we can use that's available under a CCO license, which just means that we can use it for anything. So let's get that downloaded and added into our project. I'll be back to you in a moment. If you haven't already, please go to the link in the description, download the assets and add them to your assets folder as part of your Godot project. Here we can see I've added mine into the Kenny-UI folder underneath assets. Now that we have our UI pack added, let's expand and add our game screen. So, in order to do this, we need to be adding a version of a control node. A control node can be thought of as a user interface node, and it does things slightly different to a Node 2D, specifically in terms of having it positioned and how it deals with screen resolution. For the purpose of this, what we need to add first is a center container. What that means is that any of its children will be added directly in the center of the control, and we can effectively rely on that. So it has a set size, however, so we do need to set it to the size of our screen. So because we know in our project settings that our window is 480 and 448, but that's at a 2x magnification, we need half of these values, so 240 and 224. So if we go to layout and go to transform, go to 240 and 224. We can then see that I added in an extra column that I didn't need to previously, but we can see that our UI layer is there as well. So now that we have that, let's add some items. So what I like to do is add in the assets that I need, and then I can position them as I need them separately. So in this case, I need to add in my back panel. So in this case, it's a 9-patch rect. A 9-patch rect takes a texture and then takes the corners, separates them, and then tiles the borders. That means that we can have an image that we can make larger or smaller as we need it to, depending on our game, not necessarily dependent on the resolution of the image. So in this case, I will press load, go to assets, Kenny UI, PNG, and find my grey panel. Now that I have that, I need to set the patch margin to 5 in this case. I've pre-checked those. We can now see that I have a little dot in the center of my screen. I need this to be a bit bigger, so I'm going to set the minimum size of the panel to 100 and let's go 55. We might make that larger or smaller later, we'll see. On top of that, I also want to add in a label, which I will pre-populate with you win, but I'm going to change that to be in black rather than in white. So I can go to label settings, create a new label settings and set the color to black. I'm also going to put in a texture button. So a texture button is a button where you can set the textures of how that button looks depending on an image. Wrong folder. Assets, Kenny UI, PNG. In this case, I'm just going to pick, trying to decide, so much excitement, skirt 2 for my normal. For my pressed, I'm going to go 3. Quick test just to make sure that works and looks as I want it to. Yeah, I'm happy with that. So I now have each of the 3 components that I need. Actually, let's add a label to our button as well, which says play again. Okay, so we have everything that we need there. Admittedly, sizing, etc. may be needing adjusting, but let's do that now. So I want the label that says you win to be above the button, which contains everything else. So within my 9-patch rect, I'm going to add a VBox container. What that means is that any children of that container are stacked vertically. So in this case, I can put like this, and I'll put that in there for the minute as well. We can now see I've got things in a certain order. However, I want my VBox container to be centered across my 9-patch rect, my back panel. I can do that by going to layout. I can set my layout mode to anchors and change this to full rect. I'm now centered across that. Obviously my texture button is too large, so let's fix that. On that note, the full rect option means that we expand to fill the space as best as we possible, and we center it. It's a very useful option. In order to get my button to fit and to match the rest of my UI, I need to press ignore texture size, and then I set my stretch mode to keep aspect centered. That then means that the button has its size and will try and keep to that size but expand out. I will, however, have to set a minimum size in layout custom minimum size. In this case, for panels 100, let's go 80 and 20. And there we have that. So if we check, we can see that we have our 9-patch rect is a certain size, our VBox container is slightly larger. That's because our label is expected to be part of our button. So let's just move that in and then correct what we have here position-wise. So we can see that we have our anchor is up the top here, which matches roughly where our texture button is, in fact exactly. But our label isn't corresponding to that. So what we can do is we can go to our layout options. We can change our layout mode, reset it, and we then get it in roughly the correct place. But let's go a bit further. So let's change this to anchors. And our anchor settings, we can say either full rect, or let's go center actually. Go center. Okay, that looks better, but it's clearly a little bit too large. So let's go to our label settings and reduce our font size. We'll then need to adjust this as well. So I like to find it's always worth trying changing it and then changing it back, which often helps. So we have play again, that's looking fine from my point of view, but our label is not. So in this case, our horizontal alignment can be center, and there we have something that looks at least broadly okay. As an exercise, feel free to pause the video, adjust the UI to match our own aesthetics, and then when you're ready, press play to resume and we'll move on to the next section. Okay, now that we have the user interface however we want it to look, let's progress. I'm going to rename the center container to game over screen, and then I'm going to save it as a branch. So the branch of the scene. Now that we have that, I'm going to go into the scene and I'm going to add a script. What I'm hoping to achieve is that when we press this button, the game will reset back to its initial state. So I'm going to add a script, game over screen is fine. And then within our button, I'm going to go to node, signals, I'm looking for pressed. I connect that to our script, then I have some functionality. I'm going to keep this really easy and just do get tree dot, I believe it's reload current scene. So now if we press F5, we press this, we should see that it all resets back to the start. Our next step is to make the game over screen show when we either win or when we lose. What I also want to do is have this message be customized. So in this case, we have a message that says you win. It should instead say you lose if you lose. So in order to do that, let's go to our game over screen. Let's add in a method called display that takes in a message of type string. All we then need to do is our label, so you can drag it to get the path, dot text equals message. Let's give that a moment. It's can't find string, capital S. And then if we move into our level, we have this section that currently prints out you win. So instead, let's have it go to game over screen dot display, and this time we'll say you, and then we'll just put something rubbish to differentiate it from what we currently have. I go in and I select all of these, it now changes to you disagreega. But let's start by setting that to disabled, changing this to you win, and then trying again. So now we don't have it displayed, and when we get to the end, we also don't. What we also need to do here in our display is set it to self.visible equals true. And now we should be able to collect all of the flags. It should display, press play again, we restart. Excellent. Now that we can win, let's make it so that we can lose in a permanent way. So in order to do that, we need to add the concept of lives. So let's take a very similar approach to what we've done here. So we have our flags. Let's add in a live display. So because we already have our level, we have our flag display, let's just duplicate that. I'm going to call this live display. I'm going to change my image to the image of our character. Assets, Kenny, tiles. We have this character, I believe. And then let's reposition it. So here we have it as a position. Let's transform that and set this to. Actually, let's go a bit further. Let's go to 208 times 16 times 2 minus 16. Okay, so this means that if we have a value of 1, we'd expect it to have just the 1 there. What I'm going to do is change this texture offset to be negative 16. So if I set this to 5, what I expect to happen now is that we have 5. Option is slightly off, so I need to just set this to minus 8. And I can now see I have 5. Because the texture offset is negative, it means that from this position, we do our 0 in the correct place, in the center, effectively, and then we go backwards to display. So we're now able to display lives. So let's decide how many lives we start with. Actually, 5 is a good number. And once we've done that, we need to make it so that something happens when we run out of lives. So in much the same way to what we have for our flags, when we gain a flag, let's get rid of the flag display. Let's change this so that we go into lives on live display. So here, if our value is 0 or lower, let's make this you lose. Smaller than or equal to 0, you lose. Okay, so that should actually make it so that when we run out of lives, we get the lose screen. However, we're not currently catering to how we actually lose lives. So currently, in our player, we call died, which does a series of things, including repositioning ourselves. What this doesn't do is inform the world generally that the player has died. So let's change that. Let's add in a signal, player died. We can then use this signal here. I think this is a good position for it. as it's after we ran all of the animations, but before we actually respawn. So what we can now do in the level is we can connect to the player died event. And when we do that, we can decrement our lives. So in this case, we can just drag that there, dot decrement value 1. So if all goes to plan, I should now be able to tactically die. We can see here that my number of lives aren't going down. Now that we've identified an issue, let's resolve it. I've done a little bit of debugging off screen and assessed that the problem is here. What's effectively happening is when we display the value, we're adding the relevant images, but we never remove them. That works absolutely fine for our flag display because we're only ever adding. But for the lives, when we're decrementing, it means that we've got them there and they're always staying there, they're never getting removed. So the simplest solution is in our display value, we need to go through our children for our node, and we just need to call Q3, which removes them. We press F5, we should now see that when I die, I still don't lose a life. Oh, there we are, I do. Okay, excellent. So now that's working, let's try and die a few more times. And I get the you lose. Perfect. Now that we can win and lose the game, we're arguably finished. But there are a few things that we can do to polish the experience and make it a bit better. Keeping it nice and straightforward from our winning and losing screen, first thing of note is that even when we win and lose, our character can still move. So let's change that. So in our level, when we display the game over screen, let's also take our player and Q3. This means that when we win, we're no longer able to move character, which is what we want. Next, we can clean up our sort of test status that we set up. So we have our player, we can return their position to 16 times 6. Always do that. Plus 16 times 6. Put them back on their start row. And for our final lane, we can set this position back to 0. And that puts us back at an appropriate starting point for the game. We also have a number of warnings and errors that Godot is informing us about. Warnings come in yellow and are not actually problems within the game, and then errors come in red, which ideally we would definitely fix. So the yellow are warnings and you can choose to ignore those. I do prefer to clean them up if possible. So I believe that all of these warnings that we have are basically saying that we're never using the method or the parameter. So for most of these, because we want the syntax to be the same, but we're not including them, we either need to, in this actual case, we can delete that function because we're not using it because it's just empty. But for example, in here, we are using the function, we're not using the parameter, but the parameter is part of the function signature, so we can't really remove it. So what Godot recommends is that you add an underscore to the parameter name to indicate that you're not actually using it, and that's intended. So as a quick exercise, clean up all of the warnings that you have in your project, either by deleting the functions if they're not actually being used, or by adding an underscore if you're deliberately not using the property. And we'll get back to that in a moment. Okay, so I've now removed and resolved those warnings that we were getting, and that leaves us with errors. So there are basically two types of errors that I'm getting. Both of them are related to the fact that we're trying to do things in the editor and that the nodes aren't necessarily available. A simple way of resolving this for our safe platform is changing our check here. This basically means is if there's a node, then return, or if there isn't a node, return. An alternative way of doing this is get node or null, and then give it the node path, and then we get significantly less errors. So as a quick exercise, try and do the same thing for the flag that we have remaining, and I'll walk you through that again in a moment. Okay, so we have a very similar situation here where we have $sprite2d is not equal to null. So I just change this to get node or null sprite2d. Should then be able to just run it and receive no error messages. Nice and simple. Our next problem is that our platforms aren't actually displaying when we're in the editor. They were previously, and at some point that's broke. So let's just kind of work through why that is. So currently what's happening is we're trying to draw whenever we update the length of the platform. What we're not actually ever doing is updating the platform just because we're in the editor, so we can see it correctly. In order to do that, what we can do is we can go into our script for our safe platform, add in a process function, so it runs every frame, and we can, if the engine is in editor mode, so is editor hint, then we run setup length. We do immediately see, however, a series of error messages. These error messages are there because what's happening is every frame we're now trying to run the clear collision shapes on the player mover 2D node. But the player mover 2D node is not a tool script, and therefore it isn't, for the purpose of the editor, it does not have these methods available. So the simplest solution is to go in and add tool directive. We should now see that we're still getting them, but if we go to level, go into 2D, we now stop receiving those messages. And we can now update these platforms to have the length that we want them to, and we can save and it will run correctly. Our next element of polish is that we can improve the visual slightly. So you may notice that we're using pixel art, but all of the pixel art is slightly blurry. How to fix this? If we go to project settings, rendering and textures, the default texture filter will be linear. We can change this to nearest. What that means is it effectively hardens off and stops trying to blur together images. So we get clearer and crisper visuals, or pixel art in this case, which just makes the game look a little bit nicer. Our next item is to prevent the user from actually being able to exit the playing field of the game. There are a few ways we can do this. The easiest one for how I feel this game can play is to just kill the player or have them die once they leave the current play area. Alternatively, you could make it so the movement code prevents them leaving the areas, but I'm just going to make it so they die. So to do that, we need to add an area 2D, call it play area, and add a collision shape. 2D. I'll make it a rectangle to match our world. I'm going to position it at the center point, not including this bottom row, which makes it 120 and 104. And then the size is twice that in both directions, which covers our map. So in the play area, we can go to collision, take off the layer, but the mask wants to be connecting to the player. On the area exited, let's connect to that on play area exited on the level. And then here we can just call on player died. And give it a go. If we try that now, we can see that although it does die, we're not actually doing anything different. So instead what we need to do is go to our player and call died. Where's it died? You can check that by going here. Yep, it's a function died. So let's try. And the die and respawn. While we're here, let's correct the respawn position to be back to the start point as well. So here the respawn location is here. Let's just update that to for 16 times 6. And now when we die, we should return back to the start point. Excellent. Last and by no means least, let's add some sounds to the game. I've added some sound clips into the repo. It's linked in the description. Specifically, these are just a nice little pleasant noise and a less pleasant noise for when we either pick up a flag or when we die. So let's add those in. So the first thing to do is to add in to our level a audio stream 2D. So in this case, I'm going to add in audio stream player 2D, rename it to pickup sound, and then I'm going to drag the boop noise onto the pickup sound, which will be populated here. Within our level, we have a method called onFlagPickup, which is the perfect place to play this audio. So let's drag the pickup sound in and do dot play. So my flags are a little bit inconvenient to get to, so I'm just going to quickly adjust these so that they're easier to see. So hopefully you can hear on your side that when I pick these up, I get the boop noise. So your exercise is to do the same and then add it in for the died sound. So play the splat audio when the player dies. Give that a go and I'll walk you through it in a moment. Okay, welcome back. So I'll assume you've done that. I'm just going to put my flags back where they belong and then we can make our adjustment. So let's add in a audio stream player 2D, call it died sound and drag on our splat. Now I've done that within the level, let's go to our on player died and we can play our died sound. Dot play. And now whenever we die, we should hear a bit of audio. So it is worth noting that because of how the died works, we get the audio a little bit too late. So let's fix that up now, just to try and progress. The crux of this issue is that inside the player script, we run several animations before we actually emit the died event. Specifically, we already wait for the blood splatter to finish. So what we can instead do, if we go into our player node, we can add in the died audio into here, which is an audio stream 2D. We can add in the splat, and then here we can draw that in, do dot play. So if we remove that from our level, and then try again, what we should find is that the audio now is synced up to the death animation. And that marks the end of this tutorial. Over the last 7 videos, we've created a fully working Frogger clone using the Godot game engine. Remember to subscribe to be notified when the next tutorial comes out. Have a good one.